I was like, it's the same. Whenever you put a headset on, it just changes. That was fun. That was funny.
Yeah, for sure. And my hair is like, I really need a haircut right now, so it's a little bit long.
Right.
And I've been trying out some different styles recently before I get cut again. I won't be going back to the long hair ever again, but
that's right. You gotta try it at least once. I feel like you gotta be
exactly
a little bit adventurous at least one time.
Exactly. Pandemic was the perfect time to try it. And all
that's right.
Cool. You ready to go?
That's right. Yeah, for sure.
All right. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to, it's been a long time, but welcome back to another episode of the Volleyball Source podcast. It is Friday, November 17th, and we are joined by an absolute legend, friend of the show, one of the best to ever chuck the ball for Team Canada. I'm not going to say what schools he played for because it seems like he played for a million schools on his way up, but we welcome back to the show none other than Mr. TJ Sanders. TJ, how you doing? Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited. I'm also super excited that we basically got called out on Instagram to make this happen again, and then it did instantly. So it's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know who did that? Do you know who made the call?
You know what? I'm not sure. I'm sure I could go find who it was, but I'm not sure exactly who it was. So.
Okay, fair enough. Well, appreciate them to come in to make that comment and get us back together again. I mean, a lot has happened since we've last chatted. You've really jumped in with no easy buckets, so I'm excited to talk about that and kind of some of the progression about what's going on with that. But I think we should just jump first and foremost right into the Maple Volleys. There's no doubt you watched along this summer, given how in tune you are with the volleyball world these days. But that was an incredible summer, a crazy summer by the Maple Volleys. From the brink of relegation in Vienna to qualifying for the Olympics at the end of the summer. What are your initial kind of thoughts and feelings on how the summer went for the Maple Volleys?
I mean, just in general, how it went. Obviously, it was a massive success. Like, I thought it was huge. I think my initial kind of takeaways were that you could see there was some stability building, right? Like, even through Nations League, again, you're going to be playing some really, really high level teams over a long period of time. There's growth. You're trying things out. You're trying to find what that looks like. But I was kind of reflecting on the summer afterwards, and I was getting a sense. Now, again, I don't know the inner workings the same way, obviously, that I used to.
Yeah.
But just from the outside looking in, it was really clear that it was stable. And I think the cool thing about that stability is that it presents opportunities for certain athletes to shine in a new way, right? Like, once you have this foundation that you can build from, then you can have guys that go out and play absolutely incredible in such crucial moments to get victories, right? I think this is a natural progression of all teams, of all programs. Like, if you don't have that level of stability, or if you don't have that foundation, even just as an individual athlete, right? If you don't have something you can kind of lean on, it gets really difficult to be consistent, right? And it gets really difficult to be consistent against the best players in the world, right? So to see them kind of develop that, and then to see a bunch of these guys blossom in that was pretty sweet. And I would say it was, 100% a massive success, of course. But also just really encouraging that they could find it so quickly. Like, I think they haven't solved all the problems. They haven't whatever it is. But the fact that they got to that point just means it opens up new doors. Like, I mean, once you start to break that open, you find success, you learn how to win on the international stage, it unlocks a few new levels.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. You could kind of started seeing it during the NORCECA Championships, and I mean, it's such a hard event to look at and compare to anything else, because in reality they played one good game, and that was against Cuba in the semifinals, right? But Cuba was playing much better, and I know they had beat them earlier in the summer. So you could kind of like look at that and just kind of point to that, but they carried in a whole other level of confidence going into that Olympic qualifier. Let's start first and foremost with Luke Herr. He's obviously one of the biggest additions to the roster. I'm a bit of a fairy tale story, if you will. Rob and I did some end of season awards, and I mean, he was pretty much unanimously voted as the biggest, the best rookie, the most improved guy. Like, what a story. what were you seeing in his setting that was really allowing to like open things up for this team here?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that initial, kind of context they have of building stability. As a setter, it's our job to try and control this chaos and create some rhythm from it. Right, which is not an easy thing to do. And that's why, when you watch a lot of teams that are at a really elite level, it just looks good, right? It looks like things are flowing. Where then you watch a team where they're kind of pushing through it, or they're a little bit younger, or whatever it is, and things look a little bit choppy. A lot of times that obviously runs through the center, right? Naturally, you're contacting the ball so much. It's just going to be a reality of if you don't have that rhythm. It's, of course, up to everybody, but that's kind of something, it's a responsibility of the setter. And I thought right away from even the beginning of the summer, the results during VNL maybe weren't exactly what they wanted, but you could feel that rhythm developing, right? Which, again, I think the fact that they were able to build that stability created opportunities for excellence, right? Like you need that sort of first. And I thought he just did a really fantastic job, especially as a bit of a newer guy to the program. That's not an easy thing to do, to come in and kind of stabilize things. I think he does that not only with his presence, but also with his technique. Mm-hmm. He's very clean with his ability to deliver the ball. Like he's very vertical. His hips and shoulders are always aligned. All of his kind of contact points and releases are kind of coming from that neutral position. So he was able to create that stability, not only through the way he was delivering the ball, but through himself technically, which I think is a good reminder for younger setters, right? Like we want to be able to get to a point of mastery where we can get really creative and we can be like a DeCecco or something like that. But that stems from that stability piece and that consistency piece. And I thought Luke did a really great job, especially with a team and a program that was struggling with that, right? They couldn't find the rhythm. It was, and there's that's going to happen to most teams internationally at different moments, right? And so to be able to come in and be a key factor in developing that rhythm for the group and the offense, I think it was just outstanding. Again, it then gives opportunities for some of these attackers that I'm sure we'll talk about to end up really rising to the occasion and ultimately, playing some incredible matches that we can, now say we're going to the Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, to me, his demeanor, like you talk about stability, his demeanor is so stable, right? Like he's calm, cool, collected, and just the way he presents himself. Like it was one thing because I got to see him in person last year with the B team, and he impressed the crap out of me last year with the B team, and I know that there was some rumblings amongst the B team guys that they thought Luke was the best setter in the program. Which was mind-boggling to me last year. But just seeing how there was no difference from his demeanor on the B team than on the A team, like playing against Bruno. Like one of the first times he suits up for the A team is in the exhibition match, and you have Bruno on the other side of the net. Like, I'm sorry, like that's it doesn't matter if it's an exhibition match and just in the GAT, like that's still a big scenario, and he took it so calmly. Like his calm demeanor, I thought really helped the team because you've got a lot of like bigger personalities, whereas like maybe the left side guys before were a little bit quieter. Now with guys like Marr and Schwartz, like you have some bigger personalities on this team, and his calm demeanor was just so needed throughout the summer.
Yeah, and I think, I was actually talking to Bree King not long ago about this, but it's really interesting how the role of the setter is also to create this allure of composure, right? Because obviously attackers are going up and doing difficult things, right? You're putting them in situations where they have to try and be really aggressive, yet smart, yet explosive, right? So it's definitely our role to try and go out there and create an environment that they can do that in that. Right. And I thought Luke did a really fantastic job. And I think that comes from not only your physical demeanor, but also the choices you make. Also your, again, going back to kind of technique. If you look very composed while you're moving to the ball, it creates, I talk about this all the time when I'm working with setters and things like that. If you look chaotic and panicky moving to the ball, consciously or subconsciously, your attackers will not trust you in the same way. Right? Because they have to. They're trying to make reads all the time. They're trying to, unveil a bunch of different things so that they can know what they're supposed to do, what their role looks like. So if you look very composed and you get to the ball, naturally, that's going to help create that rhythm that you want to create, right? Because you're building that trust through just visual cues.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and he's so calm to the ball. I was saying it when watching him in the GAT last year. Like he sets pillows. Like his hands are so nice, and he just kind of flings it out there, and it just suspends in the air for a moment while the hitter, before the hitter is about to hit it. Like I think it's such a testament to me to like his growth. Like this isn't a guy that's been a part of national team programs from the beginning. He's never played junior team. He's never, he's worked his way up and really like honed his craft. Now I know Benjo had a like kind of spotted him playing against him or coaching against him for years and years when he was at Manitoba, and kind of offered him a spot in the gym last year. But his ability to kind of come in like that just proves that I think our talent, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but just like kind of as a precursor, I think our talent pool is a lot deeper than anyone thinks, including ourselves. But staying on the topic of this national team, also, I love that you brought up Brie King, because I 100% want to talk about her and the women as well too. It's great. It's like the state of indoor volleyball right now for Canada is pretty great. But staying on the men's team, another guy who stepped up huge has to be Arthur Schwartz, right? Like we move him from the middle to the right side. Of course, that transition's been happening naturally on the pro side. But through the NORCECAs into the qualifiers and even now into his pro season, he's really stepped in. Now, I had Gavin messaging me and being like, "This kid looks legit. Like he has potential to be better than me." Now, I don't know about that. I think that there is maybe that potential, but that's a long way to go. Like Gavin is up there as one of the GOATs that we have in our country's history. But what did you see from Arthur throughout the Olympic qualifiers that really has allowed him to kind of break out?
Yeah, well, obviously he's a super physical guy, and I think when he was competing as a middle, we would try to find ways to use him as often as we could, and we'd use that physicality, right? But it's fair to say, and I'm sure he would even say that maybe he's not organically a middle, right? He was probably put in that position because he was such a big guy. We obviously want his presence blocking as many opponents as possible, of course. But I think if you look at the way he moves, how he jumps, his body position in the air, he's very stable while being very explosive, right? And being really physical. So I think just by watching him, if you look at, the way his shoulders are kind of articulated to the net, the way he's doing different things, he's able to be at a really high contact point and under control, right? Which I just think is something that is very difficult to stop, right? Because if you're at a really high contact point, naturally, one, you might be jumping super high, so it's difficult to have that control. Two, maybe you're just a really big, lanky guy, so it's difficult to manipulate your body, where Art seems to really combine those things. He's able to be very physical and contact at a very high point, but be under control. And I think because of that, then it's just a constant pressure he's putting on blockers and defenders, because you can't, hope that he ends up not getting his feet to the ball, or hope that he ends up not contacting it very high. Which you look at, a lot of international opposites, it's difficult to, if the setter's moving off the net, moving far away, trying to create that horizontal component in the set, it's hard to cut that off at the right time, right? It's hard to create that relationship, especially as a right-handed opposite, right? It's got to cross your shoulders. And I just thought Art did such a very good job at that it constantly gave him the opportunity to score, right? Which is hard. Internationally, to constantly put your body in a position where you can score is a difficult thing to do. And I just thought he's doing it every single time, where even at the point he might go and his hand contact might not be exactly what he wanted, but he'll score because he's in this position where he's opened up opportunities. And I think because of that and that constant pressure there, again, as a setter, any pressure that happens in your offense, you love, because then you get to use it and exploit other areas, because now the middles have to worry about that more, especially if they're contacting it really high and the middle's not closing fully. They have to realize they have to get to their peak of their jump, or they have to get to that point in their block to actually even try to touch him. That's what you kind of want to see. So I think it was just really impressive. I mean, he's always been very impressive.
Always been so
due to the same factors, especially serving. Like, he's always been very impressive serving because he's got that high contact point all the time. He has that control in the air, but to see him at the net also have that was just really impressive. And it's a natural progression that, of course, you go from middle, your timing, your kind of perspective to the ball changes, right? It's not kind of in front of you anymore. It's crossing your shoulder. So to see him kind of conquer that a little bit more, just that constant pressure was really impressive.
Yeah, he's always been super physical. I mean, this is a guy who, after playing with he played 1 or 2 years at York, and then played with the junior team, and basically the national team was like, hey, like, you need to get to the FTC because we need to get you going pro. And I mean, like, look what's happened. He's also doing something, like, he's continued this. Like, right now he's 8th in scoring in the Superliga. He's averaging averaging 4.95 points per set in the Superliga. He's doing something that we didn't really see from Gavin in terms of succeeding at the highest level in the highest league in the world. And he has another really strong and a really good opposite in behind him in Ibrahim Lawani from France, who really tore up the league last year. And I thought they were going to start Lawani, but they went with Arthur, and I'm really happy they have because he's been phenomenal. He's really been able to continue that in. Was there ever? You played with him, right? Like yeah. Was there ever that thought back there? Like, did you have that thought back then? Like, oh, like he could actually be on the right side and he could be this effective?
I mean, to say that he could be this effective, I don't want to it's not like I saw that from the get-go, right? It's a really difficult thing to go, you know what, if he moved there, he'd probably be a really top-tier international opposite. It's difficult to say that. Definitely if you just look at how he moves and how he's able to get to the ball. And again, I just think this idea that he's able to constantly get to the ball, contact it at such a high point, is just really difficult to deal with, right? Like, again, there are a lot of opposites that are physical, but they can't reach that point all the time, right? So now Art is able to put that pressure on consistently. For sure, if you were to just see him take a swing, you're like, oh, because his footwork, the way he moves, everything like that, you're like, whoa, this could be something pretty special. But again, he was playing middle, so arm swing's a little bit different. He's trying to do things a little bit different. That for sure it was going to take some opportunities for growth into that. But I would say that I'm not surprised that it happened. I think just the way that he moved, and it's also bold for him to be like, you know what, I want to make this transition now. I think that's fantastic for him, and kudos to him to kind of have to kind of make a move like that. That takes a lot. I'm sure that wasn't an easy decision, nor was it easy conversations to have. But clearly, it's been happening for a few years now, and I very much think let's be honest. We know the pay discrepancy between middles and opposites in the professional game, and I would 100 if I'm almost positive that would be one of his reasons. Yeah, 100%. And I get that. If you look at your career, it's finite. There's going to be a moment where it has to end. And for his ability, while he was still quite young, to evaluate that and kind of lean into something that has clearly paid off with a lot of hard work, I'm sure. But no, definitely watching him play, again, not such a natural middle. Right, you look at Graham Vigrass, you're like, oh, this guy was built to play middle. The way he attacks angles, the way he moves, that kind of stuff. You're like, oh, this is what it's supposed to look like. So Art didn't have that element to him, but he could get away with things because he was so physical, because he was able to do certain things. So yeah, again, there's no surprise. I think everybody that's ever seen him play or been around the national team is like, oh yeah, I'm sure he could make that move. Did I think he could make that move and then go back to the national team as an opposite and do what he did, and then go back to Italy and do what he's doing? Really difficult to say because 99 out of 100 international players can't do that.
That's all due to his mentality, right? We talked to him after one of the games. I think it was after the semifinals when they beat Cuba, and he talks about how he played with Grosjean this past season in Monza and really just picked his brain and worked on him. I mean, you've played against Grosjean for how many years, and
brutal,
right? What kind of that mentality that he brings to the table, and that's to me, there's so many comparisons with him and Gavin in terms of just their size and their physicality. I think they approach the game a little bit differently. I would kind of say that Art's a little bit more polished than Gavin was, but they both approach the game with this intense ferocity that that you can just give it. And Art's Gavin had that kind of from the get go. Art's is still developing, but it's a lot of fun to watch. How much do you think, now we'll jump into the big question here, is how much do you think Tuomas Samuel-Vuo, the new head coach of this team, led to that stability that you've mentioned now a few times, but also I really think that he fed that fire for Arthur big time. And it's a tough spot. Like Sclater was one of our top scorers in VNL, and then he decides to leave the national team, and now Arth has to step up. But it seemed like he was ready for it and hungry for it. How much do you think Simon Vuo really spurned that?
Yeah, first of all, I'll just talk on the whole Gavin kind of Art thing, because I think,
yeah, absolutely. If you,
I think you need to. The coolest thing about being an athlete is, you're going to want to work on everything in your game, right? There's going to be weaknesses. You want to work on that and all that sort of stuff. But you also will naturally come into a style that you play. And then you have to master that style and see how it kind of, what its role is in not only your team, but sort of international volleyball. And I think what Gavin did so well was he was able to be super physical and have a line shot, sort of like, not really wrist away, but sort of that more away from his body shot that was legitimately unstoppable. Like there was nobody that I've ever seen actually stop him do that. And so it was clear that he was kind of like, okay, nobody's going to stop it. I'm going to lean into that, and that's going to develop me as one of the best players in the world. And I think that was smart by him. Of course, he was working on other things. Of course, you're trying to do a bunch of different, you're always trying to evolve. You're always trying to whatever. But I think as an elite international player, you have to find what that style is and see how you do that, and see how that incorporates into not only your team, but also obviously your role as an international player. And I think Art's style is different.
Yeah.
And I mean, his ability to get his feet to the ball, and like I've kind of consistently said, contacted at that point, move in different ways, is what he's now leaning into. So I think they're very different players from that front, but they're both leaning into their strengths, which is it's just a really important thing. I still remember when it was decades ago, I listened to Reed Pretty talk about, if you're trying to make it as a professional player, you have to lean into your strengths more. If you have a big serve, become the best server in the world. If you have whatever it is, become really good, because that will help you stand out, and that will be your advantage in those moments. And then you can kind of bridge that gap of your weaknesses and stuff like that. So it's been cool to see them both, obviously different, both very physical, obviously, but in different ways, find that success. And it's also a test.
Oh man, that sucks. He was just getting into it. Hopefully it's not on my end. Yep.
All right.
And
I'm back.
And he's back. Sorry. All good?
Yeah, great. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, no I
just said it lost connection or something like that.
All right. Sorry, you were saying it was a testament to something.
Right, I can only assume it was just some brilliant insight I had. No, but I think
I was into it.
Yeah,
I was on the edge of my seat.
That's right. No, but it is a testament to, a couple guys really trying to hone their strengths and really find what that looks like with the program. Now, to go to Tomas, I think, it was pretty clear from the very beginning that going in, again, he's got such a short runway up to the qualifier that you could tell that they were trying to simplify things and find that stability, right? Like that, just in watching them play, it was very clear that that was their objective, right? Try and simplify things so that all of a sudden we'll have big moments, and hopefully our big players can rise to those big occasions and ultimately get us some wins, which clearly they were able to do. But that was definitely clear from the beginning. And I think in that, if things get very simple, all of a sudden it gives a little bit more autonomy to the individual athletes, right? So now all of a sudden Art, maybe they're not running anything crazy, maybe not whatever it is, but now Art has to go and make something happen from that, right? So it does kind of give you this confidence piece where you have to have these systems in place, make it a little bit more simple, and then let these guys go and ball out more or less. And then I think it was an interesting moment where all of a sudden Art became the opposite, right? Because of other situations and other circumstances. And I just think that psychologically also changes things, right? I know there's a lot of different philosophies on, you want competition in the gym, you want, it's going to have everybody rise to the occasion, but there's no denying that in a big moment, if you're the guy, it's easier to feel like the guy.
Yeah.
Right. Where so many times, you're whether it be you're overseas, wherever you are, I've seen so many guys battle with that, where it's like, well, I want to be the guy, but if I make this mistake, what's going to happen? right? That's a natural kind of progression to that competition, which ultimately can create more resilient athletes, but also in big moments, it's difficult to manage that because you're not focused on what you necessarily want to be focused on, right? Like the game at hand or what's in front of you. So I'm sure that Tomas kind of facilitated that and developed that. Again, I don't have any direct insight to that relationship, but it was very clear that he rose to the occasion when he was given that opportunity.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible to watch. Like especially him, that first game against Cuba in Norsicas was really when it was just kind of like, oh, like he can be the guy, like he can lead a team, like he can. I mean, he was the first one to say in our post game interviews, like I don't know why they just didn't start blocking me line, like I'm a line hitter, and they just didn't take my line at all. But yeah. I mean, we saw like it's been a very tumultuous 2 years for this team since the end of the last regime ended, of course with like Glenn moving on, but then there was also so much turnover with you yourself finally taking that official leave from not only the national team but volleyball, Graham leaving, Gord leaving, Blair leaving, Steve being injured, Shawan stepping out and leaving the team. That there was so much change. And now like it's nice to have like a little bit of stability. Do you think that was that the goal from the beginning for Tuomas? Was from your perspective, was that the way that he saw this team playing the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the little that I know him, I do think that keeping things simple is a core principle of his, right? Like, not overcomplicated things, not. Now, of course, that's something that you can layer on top of, right? Like once you build the foundation, then you can start growing. Similar to Glenn, right? Like Glenn was very much systems based. How do we develop these systems? Once it's crystal clear what those are, then we can start to evolve. It seemed like that was definitely a core focus of his. Now it's interesting because that kind of makes sense, right? There's a lot of turnover. Obviously, volleyball is evolving always, and I think for this new group to start to have these opportunities to flourish and grow and figure out what their kind of identity is as a group and all that sort of stuff, sometimes you need that. It's kind of clear that for them to reach heights so quickly, they needed to focus on that, right? That was obviously something that they needed to kind of go back to. Okay, what is our style of volleyball going to be? What do we want it to look like? How do we, again, create opportunities for athletes to kind of make plays? Because sometimes through systems, you take away the individual athlete, right? That's obviously a side effect that can happen. And it was clear that through this progression of the summer, that was not the case. And it presented opportunities for guys to have a really fantastic performances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we saw like Mar has been. I think Mar to me is like has been the cornerstone of this team now for 2 years. Like this team, like lives and breathes as Mar does. But I think finally we saw Eric Lepke to his full potential during the qualifier, to his full potential of what everyone in Canada knew he could be. We hadn't really seen that yet in the Maple Volleys jersey. Right, we had seen it a little bit professionally. Like he had a really good year with Toronto last year. The year before, he finished really strongly with Padova. And of course, we had seen it so many times over the years with Trinity Western. But the way he stepped up, just it kind of reminded me that like, oh look, like we do have some dogs out here. Like having him and Mar starting and Nick come off the bench, I thought was huge. And it was very apparent that both like Mar and Lepke were provided the space to kind of like play the game as like in a little bit of the way that they wanted to.
Yeah, and I think I was almost most impressed with what was going on the left. Like I was just very, very impressed with what they were able to do. Again, like even my time playing with Mar, with Steve, an incredible athlete. And he would have games where you're like, he's our guy and nobody can stop him. But it's very, very difficult as an international player to be that's your consistent output, right? Very, very hard. And that goes through all positions, all opportunities and things like that. But you could definitely see it, that it was there. And, even last summer, you could still feel it. It's like, hey, he's still obviously a very elite performer internationally. But I do think in that qualifier and kind of as this summer progressed, that's just now where he was. That was just every game. You know what you were going to get. And he just was really proving, even again, right now over in Italy, he's just proving that he's, in that top tier of international players, which he has always kind of jumped in to and been amongst. But to have that consistency where that's just now his level has been really impressive to see. Because again, there's always an interesting progression, especially for attackers, right? You come into the new international phase.
No, not again. Yeah, sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, back to Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, I just think it's so difficult. Oh yeah, so this kind of progression for attackers, right? Usually you're typically you're now able to start or you're playing on the international stage. That typically comes from you being really physical or you're able to do things at that level. And so you typically have like this big breakout where it's like, whoa, you have a big game or whatever it is, or you play really well. But then other teams start to figure you out, right? Or other teams start to put more pressure on you. Or other teams start to, in their blocking systems, look at you a little bit more. Like naturally, if all of a sudden you're a new guy coming in, you're kind of like their last thought, right? So, and of course they know that. Like the setter's trying to use other pieces, and then they're going to use your physicality in certain moments. But maybe teams haven't cued in on you in the same way. So then they start to cue in on you, and then how do you respond, and what does that all sort of look like? Mm-hmm. And Moore's always adjusted very well to those different progressions. But now that he's just there and stable and always at that level, I think it just changes the environment for the group, because that you have a guy that's able to kind of always do something at that level, even from the service line. Like he's now become a really, really, effective server. And then you pair that with Eric coming in, and exactly that. Like everybody knew he had the faculties and the ability and the physicality to do all these sorts of things, but it's difficult to kind of find that consistency, and obviously different roles are happening. What's it actually look like? How does it evolve? So to see those two guys really take that and run with it. And again, I do think that gives opportunities that Luke always has kind of like a bailout option, and then it opens things up for Art. And then all of that opens things up in the middle, right? I just really saw those guys on the left kind of as the anchor, that they were just playing at a really, really high level consistently. That again puts so much pressure on other teams that it develops naturally to open everything else up.
Yeah, 100%. It was the World, like the Olympic qualifiers, that just everything came together at the right moment. Like everyone just kind of meshed, and it all just settled at the right moment. I mean, you talk about the middles, like Danny Demyanenko, I think might have been, other than Mar, might have been Canada's best player. Even I would almost say Danny was better than Mar consistently throughout the summer, all summer long. He always brought it. And I mean, I know he was a guy that was kind of like left off the roster in last year and has always been kind of a fringe guy. So I love to see that he was able to jump in. And then Schnitzer, I mean, this is a guy who hasn't really been on people's radars for a long time, but he's quickly been climbing the ranks, and like it's been fun to watch his progression.
I was honestly blown away by Schnitzer. I didn't really know what to expect, and both those guys, with the actual A team, were kind of like newer to playing all the time.
100%, yeah.
Right, and I think it's
playing at all.
Really right, and it's really cool because again, you're going to be given opportunities. You're going to be playing somewhere professionally. Who knows what it's going to look like? And it's a skill in itself to be able to take advantage of those different opportunities, right? Like obviously, naturally, there's going to be some instability in just the coaches trying to find what's the lineup going to look like, what's the style of play we're going to use. You're trying to connect with the setter. You're trying to all this sort of stuff. And so Schnitzer to come in and do what he did. Now, again, Danny's kind of like proved it over a bit of a longer period of time, but was undersized and, was trying to figure out how to be, different things like that. But Schnitzer coming in, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like he's on the court. Okay. And then he performed at a really high level and, clearly was the right guy for that role that they needed. Like it was kind of neat. I didn't really know what to expect. And then again, kind of the way you put it, of everything seemed to come together at the right time. You could see that in every kind of facet, like in the way they were serving, the way they were receiving, in the way that those guys on the left, what they were doing, Art, Luke, and even these guys in the middle, kind of everyone was pushing everything forward,
That first contact game, like the reception from like Norseca on into the Olympic qualifiers was night and day. Like we were one of the worst receiving teams throughout the past 2 VNLs and last year's World Championships, and I wouldn't say we were the best, but we were definitely not the worst anymore. Somewhere more middle of the pack, and it just solidified so much. And we had so many guys step up from the baseline too. I mean, Art is an absolute weapon. You said Mar, Lepke, and then Luke was a guy who was kind of known for throwing in these muffins, and it turns out he's just been dealing with a bung shoulder for a while and just started ripping on him at the qualifiers. It's kind of like, oh, okay, let's go. Love to see it. But yeah, it was that whole ride of Olympic qualifiers was something else. It really was.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that all of a sudden you're in a moment where things haven't been going for quite a while, or up to their standard, maybe you could say. And that's hard. Like, it's hard to still push forward, still have that focus, try and do everything you can to see the team come together and put together a performance. So, I mean, it was just really encouraging as sort of an alumni from that group, from that team. I mean, I was freaking out every game. Obviously, I was watching all the games and really enjoyed it. But also, again, a testament to the program, to those guys, like all those guys. And that's a difficult thing internationally as well. There's so many good players. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no denying this summer, last summer, all that sort of stuff. They were always good enough, let's say, right? They're always talented enough. They can do things, but how do you create the environment, or how do you, maybe a little bit of luck, like maybe guys happen to be feeling really healthy at the right time. All these things have to kind of come together to see a performance like that play out. And I just think, I'm really happy for them. I'm really proud of them, because I can only assume it's been a difficult kind of last little bit. And so the fact that they were able to do these things is just, it's really, really cool and very encouraging. And again, I always kind of relate it back to, for younger athletes, like, things might not be working in the short term, but I guarantee none of those guys stopped going to the gym, working hard, trying to find solutions. And then look what happens, at the very end of all, even the transition from VNL this summer to that qualifier was like leaps and bounds, right? So it's not necessarily going to happen overnight, like kind of like it did there, but I do think just that idea of progression isn't linear, and it's really cool to see these guys do what they did.
It, for me, it really proves that we're starting to find some of that depth, because if I'm to be honest, we have a lot of guys who are retired, who are done from volleyball, that in theory are still of age that they still could be running this team. Like, your whole generation, like, barring like if you don't get injured and your back gives out, you're probably still playing, right? You're probably still involved. Like, Gord is still he's still playing professionally, could still play for this team. Vigrass comes back this year, could still be playing for this team. Ban just retired. Like these guys of age, like, there's similar guys there's guys of similar ages, like, basically running the national teams of other countries. And all for good reasons. I'm not sitting here being like, you guys should still be here, but trust me, it'd be great just to still have you on the team and still get to watch you play and all of that. But I think you're doing pretty well for yourself right now. But it just kind of shows that if you give some of the exposure to those younger guys, they're going to learn and kind of get better at it. And I think if there was maybe one criticism I had about the old regime and maybe Glenn's tenor, is that there was very few times when, like, younger guys were given that shot. Even just in favor of, like, rest. Like, we didn't rest a lot of guys and give younger guys shots, where I think we were already seeing that. The guy like Sam Cooper, for example, dropped like 19 against Poland in VNL. He had signed his first contract, and he was starting games for Zawiercie, like a top 5 team in the Plus Liga this year. Like, that kind of stuff is still new to Canadian volleyball. And if you look at some of the stuff that's coming up, it's really exciting to see all of the kind of prospects. And I hope that we continue on the national team to give some of these younger guys a shot, right? Like, we know we're going to Paris, right? Like, we know we're going to Paris. We don't need to play Mar every game of the VNL. Hell, he doesn't even need to go every single week, right? Maybe leave him at home, rest up. Let's, figure some things out amongst the team. So for those guys to step up, to have guys like come out of the woodworks, like Schnitzer, like a Luke Herr, just really shows how much more depth we have than I think anyone on the national team in Canada or outside of Canada even realize, like myself included.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that it's really cool and really encouraging, even just the sheer number of athletes competing right now over in Europe and doing different things professionally, then obviously is creating the opportunity for, if they are called to the national team, they have some of that experience. And I totally agree. I think, in going in and starting to be a mainstay at the international game is a big risk. It's a risk for the coaching staff to put you in. It's a risk for you to see, can you actually make it? And so it's really cool to see a lot of these guys rise to the occasion, and kind of find their own style internationally, which will kind of evolve, I'm sure, and even those similar progressions for attackers that you see all the time. But I totally agree with you. I think it's really interesting to see a lot of these young guys have this opportunity, which, again, the kind of older generation leaving, you kind of knew, okay, who's going to step up? Who are going to be the guys? Like, I think all of us were kind of waiting for that. What are we going to see? Yeah. And it's cool because a bunch have. And that's really encouraging it's really encouraging for us.
Yeah, that next generation there, it took a little while to blossom, but we finally saw it. Do you ever like watch and be like, I wish that was me? Is that going to be a natural thing for you, kind of always, just as like an athlete and as a competitor?
Yeah, I can't watch anything without wishing I was doing it. I watch an NBA game and I want to go shoot hoops after or something like that, So I think watching it, I was certainly, well, first of all, just the natural adrenaline you get, right? Like it's a little bit unique. Okay, I watched that basketball game. I don't have the same feeling behind it because I'm watching these guys compete. I've had that same feeling that they're having right now. And so for sure, I miss it. I miss that feeling all the time. Even, the national anthem will play and I bet my heart rate just doubles over in that span of that time. So for sure, I miss the, that challenge, that adrenaline rush, that, kind of the test that you have against the best in the world. But at the same time, it's also cool to kind of live vicariously through those guys and see what they're able to do.
Mm-hmm. I think we do. I would be remiss if I didn't mention a big shout out to Bulgaria, of course, for their big win over Belgium, which is basically, we were talking about how great this turnaround was. But I mean, for a second, there was an entire day that I was I was not happy and I was not in a good mood after we lost to Belgium there. Luckily for us, unluckily for Belgium, the moment got a little too big for them. Up in the fourth, ended up losing it in 5. But to me, that's just kind of those reminders. It was a very big reminder, kind of after a few days of bliss, after how well everything got, just how new all of this was. Because it's clear that I think Belgium played fantastic throughout that entire qualifier. No one really had any video on them. No one really had an answer to them. You have got a guy like Farrah Riegers who's just come out of nowhere and starts putting up numbers like he is. Sam Drew obviously coming back, but that the team against Belgium was not the team that we had been seeing the rest of the time.
Yeah, I think Belgium is actually a really interesting one because they're that setter's always been, in my opinion, very underrated.
Dahls?
I think he's very good. And so, I always looked at them, but the unknowns were exactly Riegers, these different guys that I'd never seen at that level. Yeah. And again, this goes back to the testament of they were able to play at an extremely high level, but couldn't necessarily hold that. Right, they kind of bottomed out a little bit, which is the reality of international. That's why watching the Olympics, watching the very, very best do something is really cool, because everyone in the world is trying to figure you out. Everyone in the world is trying to develop that stability and consistency. So if you can't hold on to it, you're going to lose it. And I think that even the same thing for us in that Belgium game. Right, we really couldn't hold on to that in the same way as we were earlier.
Yeah.
Right. And it's cool because now we've put ourselves in a position where we were able to play well enough that now we get more opportunities to work on that. Right. Because it's also hard to work on that in practice. It's not like, you can just keep doing that. You have to be in these moments and be in these opportunities, which again, I look at my early career with the national team and we had a lot of those. We were playing Brazil all the time. We're playing, all these teams a lot. And so we got to start to figure out, okay, they're trying to figure us out. How do we figure them out? What does that relationship look like? And then as you gain experience, it becomes a little bit easier and you can kind of be in that space a little bit more consistently. And so you're totally right. It was a cool reminder that, okay, we've had this hero's journey, but there's still a long, again, going into Paris, it's still going to be a really difficult tournament, right? Where we haven't like cracked the code and now we're in this next kind of phase. We saw a lot of guys step up in really big ways. We saw the team stabilize in really cool ways. But there's so many other layers beyond that create really, really high performing programs.
Yeah. And for me, the big thing is that, there's always going to be an undulation of programs, right? You can't always be rising. You can't always be, there's always going to be some good times and some bad times. But I just love the fact that this program stopped that skid early and was able to jump back in amongst the elite. Because there's a few other programs, like if I look at Iran, for example, Iran is a country that I see so many parallels with Canada just in when they came up. I think they came up maybe a little bit earlier than us. It was at like 2011 World Cup that they really started to be coming onto the scene. But yeah, like they looked really good in the last year in VNL, not so good this year. Whereas like we kind of flipped that around. It's nice to see that we're staying amongst the elite, because it would suck to have like a golden generation be relevant for a decade and then have everything drop off again.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's obviously the difficulty with all these kind of programs, is that everyone's striving for the same thing. So exactly, you lose that generation. Okay, what does the foundation look like below that? How do you actually kind of transition that? Same thing kind of with, if you look at university and college programs, it's a similar thing. There's going to be turnover, obviously a larger scale for national teams and stuff like that. But I just think that's what kind of makes this whole thing cool. And to see the program not necessarily having the success or stability that we were used to. It's cool that there was still buy-in. There was still, the belief that things could get to where we want it to get to. Because that's the biggest thing, right? Exactly like you said, there's going to be this undulation. That there's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times. And when you're on that descent into bad times, what's the response, right? And again, this goes back to every athlete's career. Everybody's career are going to win big games, are going to lose big games. So how are you kind of digesting those losses or digesting that kind of descent so that you can be prepared and then eventually turn it around, which is exactly obviously what we were able to do this summer.
Yeah, 100%. I think the big thing is going to be very interesting to see how we react at VNL next year, because I feel like a lot of teams might have a bit of a chip on their shoulder about us, right? When it comes to, like how come Canada qualified? Last year we were beating them up at VNL. So it's going to be interesting to see how we respond. Like, do we go back to what we saw from VNL, or do we see Olympic qualifiers? Like, which of that team, and like, who are we going to bring? Like, there's so many questions to be answered. Of course, we answer the big one. Will we be going to Paris? Yes, but there's so many more moving forward. Real quick, I do want to touch on the women's team. You brought up Bree King earlier. Now, if you had asked me at the beginning of the summer, if you had asked me in August who was going to be qualifying for the Olympics directly through this tournament or at all, I would have said the women's team. No doubt about it. I think they've been on an incredible run the past couple of years. Let's talk about let's start with Bree, because you obviously have a relationship with her. Her like yes, we have some fantastic people like Kira and Alexa, but her integration and her stability that she's brought to the team has brought so much, and I genuinely think that she is amongst the elite setters in the world right now, which is crazy because I don't think we've ever had that on the women's side. Someone in her position. What are you seeing from her? I'd love to see, what is kind of underneath the hood that's making her so damn good for this for Team Canada and in Brazil.
Yeah, well, I think even it's another kind of story of she was given the opportunity to be the player at a pretty young age, and she was able to rise to that occasion. Again, a really difficult thing. So there's obviously an element of she's a fierce competitor, probably a little bit stubborn. I feel like you kind of have to be. If you're one of those younger players coming up, you have to be able to handle certain situations that maybe you're not used to handling. I think especially when it comes to setting, there's obviously a certain baseline of technical prowess that you need, right? You need to be able to deliver the ball in a certain way. But ultimately, your responsibility turns into, can you create trust in your attackers? Can you be bold when you need to be bold? Can you be composed when you need to be composed? And from a very young age, she was clearly able to do that. And now it's just been kind of snowballing into she's now a force to be reckoned with, more or less. And so I totally agree with you. I think it's been really cool watching her. It has to stem from this fact that she is a very comfortable competitor on the court. It didn't seem to take a long time for her or as a viewer to feel a sense of composure from her. And then obviously there's going to be growing pains when you're a younger setter and you're trying to understand these different, ways that the game works. But I think that was kind of a big factor for her to kind of step into it. And I could not agree more. I think again, going back to the stability and leadership in terms of how we're feeling the rhythm as a fan, as a viewer, is just unmatched. Like, she's done a really, really fantastic job. And then because of that, she's been given really great opportunities overseas or south. And it's become really cool. Like, I mean, I totally agree. She's definitely become one of those setters that every team internationally is going to want on their team. And every, international competitor is not going to want to play against her, which is exactly what we want.
To me, like, she got that opportunity playing in the AU Pro Sports League, like the AU Pro Volleyball. Watching her that first season, and she ended up like finishing second or third overall. And it was like Jordan Larson, like Bethania de la Cruz, who's the Brazilian girl? Was it Sheila?
Yeah.
Sheila and Bree King. And it's like you have legitimate legends, like legitimate athletes who are going to be going, if there was a Hall of Fame for international volleyball, who would be going in the Hall of Fame, and Bree King. And just the way that you saw her grow, I think it was like an 8. And I mean, this was like back in 2021, so it was still COVID, and we were inside watching. It's the only time I've ever watched the AU Pro Volleyball. I don't really like the format, but watching her grow and become like, it was almost like a realization that like the Canadian girl she had just joined the national team. She had played for Trinity Western the year before, and the Canadian girl comes in is the best setter and is just able to be like, you could see her confidence grow throughout that event. And then all of a sudden, I'm in Quebec in Orsicas, and they're all standing for like the ceremonies, and she's just like holding court, right? Like, all of these athletes, like the Dominican athletes, the American athletes, obviously the Canadians, like they all have respect for her, and they all hold her in high regard. And it was just crazy. Like, as you said, like she was given that opportunity and she took it immediately. And her calmness on the court is different than Luke's. Like, it's she likes that attention, she likes that spotlight, she likes being a person on this team, and I think she's really helped the women's team grow. But the women's team in general has been so inspiring of late, to watch this team grow and watch what they can do. I really, really hope, because it's like between them and the Dutch, right? Is I really, really hope that they're able to make a good push in Vienna. That would be incredible if both teams ended up qualifying. Oh. Did you see that one? Did you see that one coming?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, glitched. All right, back to the drawing board.
Okay, great, perfect. That it was like right at the end of my thought too.
Yeah,
so
yeah. But no, I totally agree. I think when I also would have thought of this summer, that I would have leaned more towards, okay, the girls have a fantastic opportunity, fantastic shot. When I saw the draws be released, like the pools be released, I was a little bit like, ooh, they definitely had they were more difficult journey to get there. I like looking at it, I was like, wow, this is going to be really difficult. But the way they were able to perform, it instilled a bunch of confidence in me. I do believe that going into next summer, we're in a really good position to make that push. But I couldn't agree. Like, I think I'm a huge fan of this team. What they've been able to do has been really, really cool. And again, there's a bunch of now international superstars blossoming from this group, which again is just really exciting, being a Canadian volleyball alumnus, but also fan. And it's been really cool to see how they've kind of ascended into now being, again, a team that other teams don't want to play. Like they're a really fantastic group to watch.
Yeah, I really, really, really like Shannon Windsor. Have you had the chance to talk to her at all, or meet her at all?
I've talked to her, I would say a little bit. We've brainstormed a little bit. We've kind of talked shop a bunch. I've done some things for them, but I want to get to know her more, obviously. And if you look at just the transition of her coming into the program and what's going to happen to it. Now, again, there's so many pieces of the puzzle that are always evolving in a program like this. The same thing with the men's side. There's so many different things, but it's quite clear from the outside looking in that, okay, comes in, again, stability, opportunities, these athletes start to grow. Now we're on the international stage.
Yeah, it's huge. I love the way Shannon Windsor runs that team and in timeouts and stuff like that. It's also really exciting to see what's happening with the women's team, especially when you look at some of the prospects who are coming up. Oh,
I'm starting to get concerned. I'm like, what's going on here? I have perfect Wi-Fi, perfect battery.
Do we want to?
Hey, adversity. We're here for it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. But yeah, I was just saying, like, it's like some of the prospects that we have coming up the pipeline for this women's team are quite impressive. When you look at like someone who like 6'9" Anna Schreck, right? She's already won an NCAA like finals MVP. Like she's already won an NCAA like championship. Like I don't know if we've ever had as big, both in like stature and in performance prospect, like coming into the national team potentially since Sarah Pavin. Right, that's the only comparison you can make, and Schreck has the potential to be better. So when you look at that talent potentially working in with a Kiera Van Ryk, with an Alexa Gray, with the Brie King, whew, that's very tantalizing for this team.
Yeah, and I mean, so I was at that Nebraska-Wisconsin game, and just a presence at the net.
Oh, I bet.
Right, like it's also the interesting kind of thing where, having such a blocking presence, it's rare to see that impact the game so much. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you were aware of that game, but Nebraska had something like 49 attacking errors or something, and Wisconsin had like 12. And Nebraska ended up winning that game.
Wow. But
I was blown away because the whole scope of the game was changed because Wisconsin got a few big blocks. I think she had like 6 or 7. And because of that, there was no solutions from the Nebraska side. Now, eventually, other facets of the game started to play a role and things like that. But that is also very encouraging, of course. Again, being a fan of the national team programs.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I remember for her specifically, I remember watching her as a 14-year-old playing for Defensa in the 18U provincial final here back in Rim Park. And I mean, she's already like 6'6" at this point, so she's massive. She's a beanpole, but watching her prep, like in serve receive, she was as low as the libero, who's like 5'6", and I'm watching that, and I'm watching her stand up and how she's talking, and I was like immediately like, oh, like this girl is going to be special. So having her watch that progression, I unfortunately didn't get it. Wasn't able to watch that match because that was one of the random matches that wasn't the Big Ten matches that wasn't featured on Volleyball TV, and wasn't able to get to watch it on the Big Ten network. So I turned down plans for that night because I was like, no, I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna watch Wisconsin Nebraska on Volleyball TV, and I was so mad I wasn't able to watch it. So yeah, maybe I'll have to ask you. I'm sure you've got some hookups to watch some NCAA stuff. As we go, let's jump into that now, and chat about how you've done a bit of a transition. We talked a little bit about it before, but you've got no easy buckets across your chest. If anyone has been on Instagram at all over the past year or so, and you like volleyball, you've definitely seen TJ and the rest of the No Easy Buckets crew kind of changing the culture a little bit. How did you get involved with No Easy Buckets? Like, what was the initial thing that, like, obviously I'm sure you've known Dustin for years, just through volleyball, and at the very least we're aware of each other, but what was those initial conversations that wanted you to get involved, like, kind of at this level with him? Oh.
It's actually been great because every time it's cutting out, it's like right when you finish your question. I was like, oh, perfect.
Natural editing. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I knew Dustin, obviously. I mean, anywhere Yeah, especially if you're a North American, anywhere you're playing internationally, you're going to kind of befriend the other North Americans around you, English speakers, stuff like that. So we had played in Poland against each other for several years, and we always kind of like got along. We were always trying to read, better ourselves, kind of similar. He's a libero, not easy being a pro libero. I'm a short, unathletic setter. So like, we were kind of like grinding. We were trying to figure stuff out. So we'd always kind of swap ideas and things like that. And then, Dustin really started to take off with it. And I mean, it's been really cool to also see what he's been able to create. I mean, it's been a lot of people want to do that, understand the benefit of it, understand whatever it is. But it's a really hard thing to do. And it's been really impressive. And I just it's been really, really cool to see. But basically, I was actually up north at the time. And he more or less like reached out and was like, hey, this is kind of what I'm doing. It was still like early phases of it all. And we were starting to work on, okay, should we build some courses? Should I start working with athletes one-on-one, stuff like that? So when we first started, it was pretty organic and loose. We weren't really sure exactly what that would look like. Again, because I also had a couple, full-time jobs up north a little bit. So ended up getting a little bit more involved in that. And honestly, just got really excited about the prospect of being able to work with younger athletes, being able to try and articulate the lessons that I've learned or the journey that I've gone through, and so many close friends of mine have also gone through, and to try and package that in a way that a younger version of myself could be really excited and interested in. Like I don't know if you remember from back in the day, but when I was younger, there'd be like one YouTube highlight video, and I'd watch that 7,000 times and try to figure out. And I'd be hitting a ball against my couch or setting against the wall or whatever, just trying to figure stuff out. So to try and be like, how can we develop something so that younger athlete and that energy and that excitement can actually transition into some progress? And so yeah, it was a pretty organic thing. He just reached out to me. We started brainstorming. We started, obviously he was growing in his own specific way. Like he was growing this brand. And then I was able to kind of figure out what my role and all of that would be. And then since then, we've kind of ran with it. This would have been, a year and a half ago that I kind of joined more or less. Now the difficulty at that time was I was in the north and we didn't even really have Wi-Fi. There's no cell service, and obviously the Wi-Fi wasn't great. So I was trying to do the best I could with what we kind of had. And then last year when I was up north, we actually got like a kind of a whole new infrastructure of Wi-Fi. So we were able to do it a little bit more and able to grow it a little bit more. Again, just time constraints were the only thing. So then to now pivot and do it a little bit more where it's, the top of my attention has just become a really, really exciting direction that we're able to go. And I mean, again, the foundation that he's built has been just unmatched. It's just really, really fascinating to see not only the excitement from the volleyball world, not only the growth in the volleyball world, but also the opportunity to kind of mesh the professional athlete, the elite athlete to the club player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks, I mean, like I've obviously been watching it now for a while, and it looks so well done. It's just different than, I mean, like, yeah, like you said, like when we were growing up, there was one, it was the Lionel Marshall 50-inch monster vertical highlight video on YouTube. Also, shout out to Mark Sherman and the Shadow Ridge Boys from 2007, because they had a pretty fire highlight video on YouTube. They were the Nevada State champs. I think that was like 11 minutes long, and I used to just devour it.
Yeah, I did too. I watched that as well.
But not only that, but like usually, like these kind of skill clinics are pretty. Like let's be real for a second here. Volleyball is a very nerdy sport in a lot of ways. And I mean, I'm sure you're like me, who you played multiple other sports before like picking volleyball. And there was always something, like I remember going to hockey camps and like soccer camps and basketball camps, and then I went to a volleyball camp, and there was just something like a little bit rinky-dinky about it. Like if that's the best way to say it. Like even when I did like regional team training center stuff through the OVA, it was just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. But what you guys are doing just seems to be cool, and like in the same way that basketball has camps. And of course I love the fact that I first and foremost, I just love Slunks. I love their model. I love everything they're doing. I love how they're doing it so much for volleyball, because like I've heard about the aftermarket, for example, for your guys' no easy bucket slunks, and apparently people are like willing to. It's good that you're able to like catch it now.
But you're saying slunks aftermarket.
Yeah, like there's like I've heard that people are dropping like hundreds, like three, four bills on aftermarket slunks. And yeah, I don't know, like it's just I like everything that you guys are doing because it just seems cool, right? And it's making volleyball look cool, and I love that. Like that to me should be one of our biggest priorities. Like let's make volleyball cool, and if we make volleyball cool and we make it a thing and it becomes a financial like viability for people, then more athletes are going to come to the sport.
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to speak too much for Dustin, but I know in our experiences that's also something he said. It's like, how can we make this something that kids are proud to be a part of or excited to be a part of or coming towards it because of that sort of factor? Exactly the same thing. Like I played basketball. And I mean, naturally, if you look at a lot of these other sports, like if you are a basketball player, if you are a hockey player, there's the NBA, the NHL that inherently is going to give it this sort of bravado that it's a little bit harder to get as a volleyball player. So that's kind of the idea. And I think it's really neat because we get to brainstorm and think about, okay, what would be cool? Also, what would be helpful? Also, what would be, a way to support it? Because, it's kind of funny being a head coach in certain programs. The reality is you can't teach everyone everything you want to teach them, right? Like, I'll be the head coach and I'll work way less with the setters than I would want to, for sure. So to kind of have a model where it's less kind of like coaching, more mentoring, where it's like, hey, I'm just going to work with setters. It's my whole career. That's all I've thought about and how they integrate the offense and all that sort of stuff. But that's all I've really thought about. So I'm an expert in that. Could I help an opposite become a good opposite? Yeah, probably. But it's not, I haven't felt it. I haven't lived it. I don't know everything that you've gone through. Where a setter, I do. I know all that sort of stuff. So it's also easier to, you could kind of think of this cool element or cool factor and attach it with something that's more or less a little bit of a need in the market. Just do the reality of sports. If you look at a basketball in the US, there's going to be point guard training camps. If you look at football, there's going to be quarterback training camps, that kind of thing, where our idea is to try and look at those models and think about, okay, how can we integrate our experience in the most precisely effective way? And I think it's just been a really cool journey because then all of a sudden you're getting really specific training for exactly what you do from somebody that's done it, and that's all I've thought about. So it's been a fascinating kind of like journey through the sport and through exactly how do we brand it? What does that look like? Who do we partner with and all that sort of stuff? So it's been it's been really, really cool to watch it grow, to also watch volleyball itself grow. We're kind of at the same moment where it's really clear that the game as a sport is evolving and is growing, and we're shortening that gap from what's happening internationally to what's happening at the younger ages. And then again, I mean, like just the way the NCAA is growing, the way that, even like we were just talking about volleyball in Canada is growing, we're kind of amongst that momentum, which is pretty exciting to be part of.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I love the focus on like the evolution of the games. I don't necessarily agree with it. The new tip meta that we've got going on in volleyball, I'll be the first one to say I'm not the biggest fan, right? Like I 100% appreciate the skill, and I know inherently how hard that is to do it. I can't do that. I can't do the sluvka, the tip and throws and stuff like that. But ultimately, like, is it the best thing for the fan, for the game? I don't necessarily know. You've talking about the evolution, and it's funny to see, how over the past decade, I think a lot of teams were defined by big banging. Oh, all right. Over the past decade in men's volleyball, a lot of teams have been defined by big banging opposites. Like if you look at a Gavin, for example, like a lot of teams like that was like, or a Grosier, like we're just gonna toss a lot of volume to the right side and they're gonna bang away. Whereas that we've seen the men's game kind of move away from that to more of like a speed, to more of a finesse style of game. Teams like France and Japan are having a lot more success now. Poland has really been at the forefront of that. Whereas on the women's side, every best team that you find has a high banging right side. Like the women's game is now dominated by dominant right sides. So it's like, is that like a progression and an evolution that you've noticed as well?
Yeah, I think in itself that specific example is certainly the case. I also feel like there is at times this progression of from the men's game moving towards the women's game.
Yeah,
because the women's game, of course, you're going to have longer rallies, less missed serves, more opportunities to score. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit easier to not have to evolve as quickly. Mm-hmm. Right. So in theory, if you can master those things or figure out systems that can be more efficient, you can do that in a different way. Where in the men's game, you can lose a game because you're not able to tip and throw and stuff like that. You can lose a game if you're not able to do certain things. And so seeing, it feels to me like, even, for instance, going down and seeing the NCAA, there's more pipe attacks. Mm-hmm. There's jump serving now is much a bigger part of the game. And these throw tips are starting to be involved, right? It is this movement from whatever happened a few years ago on the men's side is moving towards the women's side, because again, it's just kind of like this, it's almost like that's the stress test, the litmus test. Okay, can it actually work in the men's side? Yeah. And then the women's side, especially in America, which is more robust, right? There's more attention given to it. It's bold for a coach at a big school to be like, hey, let's start jump serving, or hey, let's start, playing the pipe a lot. And so it's cool to see this kind of progression. And I certainly see what you're talking about with sort of these, well, the whole game in itself has kind of moved away from big banging moments mm-hmm. and more finesse, for sure. Just because the error ratio forces it to be. And I think the error ratio being so high from the service line, you need to be able to develop kind of that efficiency somewhere else. And I think you're just seeing that. I still remember, with the national team, my own time, kind of when this whole shift was happening, we were finding that in really difficult out-of-system situations, like we're talking like negative passes, or more or less high ball situations, we were at a higher higher percentage out of 4 than off perfect passes. And we were like, what the heck? That's ridiculous. It should be like a huge discrepancy the other way. But we started to realize in those difficult situations, nobody's swinging. You're not trying to hit. You're not trying to crush it. Maybe every once in a while you go for high hands, something like that. But you're not swinging as often. Then in good situations, you're trying to pull because it's a one-on-one. You think you got to score. That doesn't lower the opportunity to score. It just increases the opportunity to make an error. And that error ratio then becomes a differentiating factor in where does the percentage go. So you're seeing these throws and all that stuff happen more now. Yes, because it's effective to score, but it's also eliminating the risk in the same way. And so I think it's just something that we're going to keep seeing things feed into the women's side, where, again, the women's side internationally is how do we end the point? Oh, we have a girl that's 6'6" that can hit it 120. Okay, that ends the point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then there will be an adjustment to that, and they'll probably find ways to stop that athlete, and then it will continue to evolve. It's a natural progression kind of for both sides of the game, and that will come from also regulation changes or rule changes or whatever it is. But I do think this evolution of the game is fascinating to see, because that's also, like, even my time with the national team and professionally, all I was thinking about was innovation. Mm-hmm. I wasn't necessarily thinking about better get my footwork right. I'm thinking about how do we find a percentage here, a percentage there, because that a percentage in the middle equals 3% on the outside or something like that, right? So how do you kind of slowly move these things up and then kind of see this game evolve and innovate? And I think that's something that definitely gets me excited about the game, because it's unique. And the same way that throwing is becoming a big part of it, okay, after a few years, somebody's going to be able to figure out how to stop that, right? It's going to happen, that everybody's dedicating their lives to it. Or regulations are going to come into place and sort of change it and evolve it. Mm-hmm. But I think that's what's cool. Again, there's so many neat things about the highest level and watching the highest level, and that's one of them. You can see that you have to try and... I remember Stefan Antico when he came and he was coaching us, and we played a bunch of mini games, like a bunch of little games that, whatever, to try and incorporate a lot of the technical stuff we were doing. And he would always say, your goal is to break the game. Like, you're trying to do it so that I have to change the rules or we have to stop playing that game. Like, right, your job is to break the game. The same way that when you translate and think about now 6-on-6, a full match, you're trying to break the game. This new way to throw and tip is kind of breaking it. So there's going to have to be a situation that something will have to change. or like all teams will just become much better at it, and that will be more the style of volleyball we see. But it's cool. Like I like this kind of thought process of, okay, you're given a set of rules, you're given the tools to do it, you're given the group to do it.
Break it.
How do you go and break that game?
Yeah. It's funny you bring up Antigua because like I remember that transition speaking to guys on the national team where it's like there was a moment in time where like out of system we wanted to be setting far off the net and inside to give that chance for the hitter to come in and like take a good swing at it. And then when he came in, there was that kind of change. It was like no, we want to be setting that out of system set tight and tight and inside so we can recycle it off the block and we can get it or we can push it or we can use that block. And I remember like thinking that being like whoa, like that was so long ago now. Antigua coached you guys like what 2007 like 17 18 like that was a whole pandemic ago, right? So like yeah, like that progression that we've seen internationally has led to like you know, if you were to ask me who is the more effective outside for Poland this summer, I would have to say Alexander Śliwka, who, you know, stature-wise, he's like, you've got Bednorz and Semeniuk and, of course, Leon for now, and yet Śliwka is so effective because of how he plays the game and the control he has. I also think it's why Lepke has embraced that so well because he has that ability to take a chew when he needs to, but the rest of the time he can send you in circles with the way he plays the game.
And you're seeing that, again, I would say everybody in the world is always looking at who is winning the biggest tournaments and moments in the world and how are they doing it.
Yeah.
And if you look at Zaxa, you know, they've had coaches changes, they'd have team changes, but they're still very dominant
3 in a row
with a small team.
Yeah.
With an undersized team. And if you watch them, it's exactly that. Perugia's bombing. Okay, they just dig the ball, put it to the net, recycle. Now they've got all their options again. Mm-hmm. And the way that they've mastered that, and it's you know, it's a very difficult thing to do, but it's kind of like, okay, if they can do it, so can other teams, so can other things. And I'm really interested to see this transition. That's kind of been a cool part of this as well, is
Damn it. We're doing so good there. I thought he was really into what he was saying too, so he didn't catch it. You were really passionate about what you're saying, so you weren't able to catch it that time.
That's right. I know. I kept running with it, and I was like, wait a second. But no, I was just saying this transition from the international men's game to the NCAA women's game is like very fascinating to me.
It's interesting that's how it's working. That they're not looking to, you know, the NCAA or the international women's game but they're going instead over to the men's game. That's what you find because this is definitely one of the things I wanted to discuss because you've now spent a lot more time in America and around American volleyball and around all of that. It's like, what is there differences between how like they do it and how we do it here in Canada? Like how has been your observations been watching all of that?
I mean, different. It's certainly different just due to the scale, right? Like some of these institutions are massive institutions, and I don't just mean like really prestigious winning programs, but also just huge staffs, huge, like everything around it is really big. And of course, the bigger, you know, that organization gets, in theory, the difficulty is to innovate, right? Like there's more kind of steps that take this sort of progression. Now, what I'm seeing is certainly that there's a sort of like a new wave of coaching and philosophy that's kind of challenging the old guard. And it is looking at what's happening internationally and how do we replicate that. Now, I think if you look at the international women's game, there's innovation, there's things that are happening for sure. But like you said, they're sort of at this phase of you get a huge, big opposite, and that helps you win games. That's really difficult to do. Like there's only so many big opposites that can do that.
Yeah.
So then you look at a team like Zaxa, and it's like, wait, they're a little bit smaller, they're less physical, and now we can see with that program, they've changed setters, they've changed coaches, they've changed, you know, a bunch of different things, yet they're still able to find success. If I'm a coach and I look at the Serbian women's team, or I look at Zaxa, it's just easier for me to see the connection to Zaxa, right? Because I know that, okay, maybe we need to change our style. What is the style they're doing? Now, obviously, you're going to amend it for your circumstance, for your personnel, for your situation. But I just think it's very difficult to find a big opposite. And you might find one, and then maybe that's going to be your style, right? There's for sure teams that are still able to do that. Now, I think it's sort of the responsibility of anyone in volleyball to see any sort of innovation happening anywhere. And just in the men's game right now, that's not necessarily historically consistent, but right now there's more forced innovation, right? Because you're seeing this constant turnover at the top, and you're just seeing a team like Zaxta be dominant. And so other teams are trying to catch up to that, which I'm not sure where that will be, in the long term, if it'll always be that way. But I think if I was, if you're a part of a big program, whether it be in the NCAA or U Sports or whatever it is, you're going to want to try and take some of those lessons and figure out how do you apply it to my situation to be effective. But I would just say like the actual differences in sort of USA to Canada, scale's got to be the biggest one. Like the sport is growing a lot in Canada. We have a lot of really great things, but it's just the clubs are huge down there. The NCAA women's, not only the teams, but the support around the teams is just massive. So of course there's just a different, and it's been an interesting kind of observation as well. It feels like in the women's game in the US, it is the more or less the premier sport to play.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? So now you get the America, which is the greatest sporting country in the world.
Yeah.
Where now, for women, it's the top sport.
Yeah.
So you get these NBA Hall of Famers, NFL Hall of Famers, all that sort of stuff. Their daughters are playing volleyball. So all of a sudden it has this element of, wow, you're getting the best athletes, right? Which does sort of change things. It does evolve things.
I mean, you definitely see it. Like Kobe's daughter played like LeBron was posting about his daughter playing volleyball. Like you're seeing that in effect right now. Yeah,
and I mean we're at events and like Patrick Ewing's there.
Yeah.
And other like Jermaine O'Neal's daughters on Texas. It's a lot of these incredible athletes that naturally gravitate towards volleyball now. And just in the nature of American sports, it is taking very much like a business. Like it is an industry that we're trying to find excellence. Like the pursuit of excellence in sport in the US is undeniable, like in any sport, right? You can kind of feel that.
That's their ethos, right? Like that's their bread and butter, who they are as a people. They are bred on those propaganda films, and I'm right there with them.
Yeah, exactly. But I think you just look at Canada, and it is a different ecosystem,
100%.
Right? It's not an opportunity to make money. It's not an opportunity to, you have all the resources, go find excellence, right? Whatever it is, where that is the situation we're in right now in the US. And it's just cool to see. It's almost like as a Canadian, it almost feels more like it's a case study or like an experiment. Like, okay, what if you gave all the resources? What would it look like? Like, what could you do? So it's been very cool. There's definitely differences. I just think not only in that, but also, America's huge. Like, there's so many athletes. We went to I think it was 14 and 15 U Nationals, and there was 108 courts, and the list of clubs, not just teams, the list of clubs was like size 6 font, and it was like a 6 foot long thing. And I was walking through and I was like, oh, she's a good setter. I'd stop and watch for a little bit. I'd go to the next court. Oh, she's a good setter. Oh, there's just the scale of what they're able to do is just a little bit different, which again is cool. That's never not been the case for Canadian sports. Of course, there's going to be countries that, other than maybe hockey, that have more athletes, more resources, more opportunities. It's important for us to know that, because then as we're going and competing, what advantages can we kind of take from that? Or what can we do as a community, as a culture, to sort of watch us develop,
Yeah. I mean, it's really exciting too, the fact that like there's a pro league starting in the new year in the women in the US, and then there's another one coming in the year after that, both with serious backings, with like people with serious money who have, who know how to get things done. And that, like, I've heard some people complain, like, oh, why can't they just work together? I think this is best case scenario. If you look at how any pro league, North American pro league, has started, every single one of them either started with 2 competing leagues, or there was a competition at some point, and it's only ever made them stronger, right? Like the MLS is truly one of the only North American sports leagues that was able to develop itself. And even then, like you could say that it had another competitor in the USL, but still, like the MLS is the only one. Whereas like the NHL had like tons of competition. Baseball there's competing leagues. I love the fact, like, I think the growth for American women's volleyball, if we think it's big now, I think it's about to blow up, and we're seeing it now. How, on the Big Ten network, Wisconsin versus Nebraska has better numbers than football games, right? Like, it's not just like, oh yeah, this is the best women's sport. Like, no, they are, like, the viewership is bigger than football games right now. And this is without a pro league. It's about to blow the F up, and I cannot wait. And it seems like you guys are, like, perfectly positioned as well right now, Neasy Buckets, to be on, like, the forefront to ride that wave.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to figure out, okay, what should our role look like in this? We have a unique kind of set of expertise, and it's kind of like, okay, what does that all look like? I couldn't agree more. I think this competition amongst the leagues, for sure, it would be more simple. It would be all these kind of things if it was one league, but this is classic American capitalism. You need a little bit of, it's got to get down and dirty, and let's see who can facilitate that. And then ultimately there's going to be some, like, I can only assume in whenever it is, there's going to be an evolution, and they're going to come together. One will win and all the players will move together, whatever it is. But it's going to force.
But not only the players, but it, like, the support staff, like, all of those, the professionalism around the teams throughout the league, and that experience, like, we're going to be providing all of these opportunities for the athletes, but for coaches and for trainers and for video people. Like, there's all of those little things that is going to allow, because in 10 years, you're 100% right. There's only going to be one of these leagues, but it's all of those opportunities before then. I can't wait to see what happens.
I'm curious, what do you think that will do to the Canadian landscape?
I mean, I think that there's, like, I think, like, in general, like anything, there's going to be a general delay. I think certain of the big clubs will really pick up on that early. I think that if and when these leagues are successful, I think you're going to see a lot more women start to jump into volleyball, because you mentioned how it's the premier sport for American girls. I don't think it is for Canada, right? I think it's a little mulled. Hockey, doesn't matter what gender, is always going to be there. Soccer is going to be the other big one, and then of course you have volleyball after that. I think those numbers have, like, drastically increased over the past, like, basically since we were kids, right? I think you're only a year older than me. Like, since we were kids, the numbers have increased dramatically. The professionalism that we've seen from the clubs has increased dramatically. The amount of athletes who are going down to the States on full rides to big programs has increased dramatically. I would hope that some business leaders in this country, although I know it's probably not going to happen because volleyball business in this country doesn't exist, and has no leadership and no vision, that someone would get together and bring a team to Toronto. At the very least, like, that's where it would need to be in my experience. But I think it's going to have a direct impact, right? Like, more so than, like, and I think if you go back to Bree King and how her ability to feel comfortable and safe and supported playing AU for that first year before she went overseas to play. You restarting it? We've timed them nicely now.
Nice catch. I know. I heard you actually say you restarted.
I know now as you go to reach and look. But yeah, like, if you look at Bree and her ability to, like, feel comfortable and grow, like, I don't think she would have had that first year growth over in Europe, So I think you're going to start seeing a lot more young girls come to volleyball because there's that direct, I can go play professionally here at home. That idea of going to play overseas it just doesn't compute for people at a young age, right? Like, it's so hard. But if we're able to create an ecosystem where they're able to create, like, their own heroes in front of their eyes, that is going to be able to be massive. And I think it's going to accelerate the level of professionalism that we see within certain clubs in Canada as well. I mean, that's what I hope for at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really curious to see how, again, if this continues to grow, will some of that talent from Canada get pulled down? Like, I'm not talking players, but support staff,
100%.
that kind of thing.
100%.
And then all of a sudden, the reflection on, is that a good thing for us or not? Like, now they're in the States, but they're learning new things. They're surrounded by new environments. Will that ultimately kick back? I think it's a really fascinating kind of, again, it'll be kind of like a cool case study, because obviously we haven't had this in volleyball happen.
Yep.
But I do think that we are in this moment where this much change and this much disruption is for sure bringing a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. And even to your point, going overseas is difficult to conceptualize, but also going overseas, you're not going to America, like the sporting capital of the world. You're going to somewhere else. Maybe sports
it's a downgrade.
Exactly.
If you go from playing even U Sports volleyball and NCAA Division I 100%, but even U Sports volleyball, and you go play in 95% of the opportunities that you have in Europe, it's a downgrade. Oh. The one good thing is that the constant restarting has made it so that we've never hit our 1 hour mark on
that's right.
On the Google.
Never hit our 1 hour mark, and editing is going to be so easy.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're just going on this passionate tirade of going from the NCAA to overseas kind of thing.
Yes. But yeah, like 95% of the time, it's a downgrade in terms of like what you have for your amenities. So I think 100%. Like how many. Like if we take Shaina Joseph, who's on the national team right now, her like European career has kind of been like tailing off, and she's not necessarily getting the contracts that she once was. She's playing for the Florida team in Pro VB, and I think it's going to increase give an exponential increase in the amount of Canadians who are playing professionally.
Yeah, totally. And I think even probably Americans that want to keep playing, I could only imagine you go to a big school in the States and then you go overseas and your first contract is wherever. Yeah. It's not going to be one of those top tier teams. No. Even if it is, it's still different. But you go to kind of somewhere else, you're probably not going to be that motivated or that like inspired to play when you see this kind of initial downgrade. Now, there's a lot to be said about that sort of hardship is what develops resiliency in you. And there's a bunch of very cool benefits that happen by doing that. But you can only assume that as a generalization, more and more athletes will start to pivot away from that just due to the reality of, and so many more athletes, it's going to be a draw to come to America and to come to North America to play volleyball. So I can only assume that these leagues are going to be pretty high level, depending on the organization, depending on all the logistics around it, and if that's feasible. But I can only assume that the level will be quite good quite quickly, which would then, again, evolve exactly to your point. Now all of a sudden you're seeing a really elite level volleyball. There's going to be the demand for viewership for sure. Now they are going to be competing with the NCAA kind of like schedule and things like that, which will be really interesting to see, because I don't think that, there are a lot of people that are Nebraska fans because they're Nebraska fans.
The majority, and that's one of the big things about NCAA Division I volleyball, is that the majority of these fans who watch volleyball in the NCAA Division I aren't volleyball fans. They are Nebraska fans. They're Wisconsin fans. They're Florida fans, right? And they attach onto that team. But I do like the pro volleyball. Like it's starting in January for that reason of not competing with the NCAA season.
Yeah, and I think it could be really smart. And then when they have both running, it'll just be a really interesting time. I think it'll be like a really cool, chaotic, a lot of cool stuff's going to come from it, where probably in like 10 or 15 years, we're going to be like, wow, remember when there was like all this stuff going on?
Absolutely.
It'll be neat to see how that whole landscape is kind of reshaped.
Yeah, very much so. I would love to see maybe some side of like preseason tournament that they hold simultaneously with the NCAA Final Four.
I think that's a natural. And again, if there's one thing, classic, like two competing markets, two competing everything, it's like American capitalism. You got to think that they're going to do something like that. Mm-hmm. Or even like, an all-star team from the NCAA plays against the winner or whatever it is, like something where they're going to try and incorporate, these kind of unique ideas. And that's the cool thing. Like, spending a little bit more time down there, it's almost like all the cool ideas we could sit here and come up with, they try to put into practice. They try to build, and so it's really neat to kind of see that progression. It's cool. It's just, I think it's so cool for the game of volleyball. Naturally there's going to be different consequences because of that, but I think it's really neat.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, like, do you think our coaches and all those people are going to go down? And I think yes. And I think one thing that we really take for granted in Canada is that because we don't have a pro league, all of our best, like, there's a trickle down effect in terms of coaches. I do think that it creates like a little bit more of a ceiling, and so that anyone, like, less people who could have become great coaches don't, and those people, like, I know people who I thought were super smart volleyball people, and they just got to a point where like, I don't really want to grind out to be a coach for a university program for $60,000 a year anymore, when I know I can go make hundreds of thousands in business, that type of thing. But like, we are very lucky in the fact that like all of our coaches are here in Canada and they're accessible, right? They're either at the universities or they're at the clubs or whatnot. So I think it's going to pull down some of that talent, but it's also going to create more opportunities for more people to come up. And I think, especially when I look at some like a league like the OUA right now, and I think just in U Sports in general, I think there's so much stagnation within U Sports because there's so many tenured coaches who just are like, the game evolves fast, right? A lot of these players played back when there was rally point scoring and no libero, like it was just a game back then. So I think that at first you're going to see maybe a bit of a talent drain out of Canada to the States to go support these leagues, but ultimately I think that it's just going to provide more opportunities, and like the beds are going to be fresh for more flowers to grow.
Yeah, and I think it's almost in the same way, because I think any university institution, it kind of breeds that like tenure, kind of get there, solidify the position, that sort of stuff. So you do see that in the women's game down south as well. But one, you have 10 times the amount of teams, Division I teams, right? You have so many Division I teams. You also now have money where it incentivizes younger, ambitious coaches to try and knock down these big dogs. So you're seeing this kind of happen all over the place, where maybe there's a program that's a little bit more of like a mid-market program, but they're sort of attracting this talent, and then that's evolving the program. Like, you're seeing a lot of teams go from 300th in the RPI to 40th, and then 170th to 30th, right? You're like seeing these huge jumps, which I think is so cool looking in at the sport, because the sport is forced to evolve quicker than it is in Canada. That's just the reality. Like, there's no good or bad or anything like that. It's just they are forced to evolve quicker and understand things in a different way, and there is more saturation of talent. So naturally, you're like, there's more competition because of that, which again stems other problems for sure. Like, there's consequences to that,
100%.
But it does lead to a more innovative and more top tier volleyball product.
What aspects of, whether it's like the Canadian or the American like culture and like system and all of that, what aspects would you bring from that and like to see be introduced here in Canada?
Well, to actually be introduced is difficult because I don't know what could directly be happening. Like, I think what Canada's done as a whole is extremely impressive. The fact that we've got two teams once again that are basically like could be in the Olympics if the women's team, which again, I believe that they are at a point where they undoubtedly can, and I hope should be there. So I think that's very, very impressive. But I look at something like, the reality of, if you're like my high school coaches, my club coaches, all those people growing were volunteers. So all their time is somewhere else. And then they're coming for the love of the game, which is, again, there's something like pure and really cool about that. But then you go to some of these clubs elsewhere, or these NCAA programs, it's now your full-time job. So of course it's going to change the way your presence when you're actually there, the amount of time that you're thinking about it. You could be an NCAA third assistant, and that could still be your full-time job, right? You could be a club coach, and that could be your full-time job, right? Like, that's a different.
There's club
right?
coaches in the States who make way more. Like, like I'm really close with guys like Joel Jansen, who of course is best friends with Benjo, and he was kind of telling me the ballpark about what he was getting paid as the associate head coach, which is basically like you're up there at Kentucky, and like, you can make money as a volleyball coach in the States. That's not really the case here in Canada.
Yeah, and I even think if you for sure at those top end, and that creates a lot of competition, but there is 20 times the demand for or the supply, trying to kind of meet that. But I do look at it like, again, the 17 U's club coach that's coming from work, and they can only now practice twice a week because he's, really busy or she's really busy. That's just a different dynamic, right? And again, I think there's something pure in that, and it should be, I think it should be more admired. Like, it's pretty amazing what a lot of these club coaches do and what a lot of these high school coaches do. Like, I don't know how you can, It's really, really incredible. But to your point, then you're going to naturally lose some because there's another avenue they can go because they need to, provide for their family or something like that.
Yeah.
Or that, you're going to have club coaches that they're trying to do that, but they're going to burn out because they can't, it's too much demand of their time and stuff like that. Where, again, if you're in the States, for sure at the highest level, like the NCAA for sure, but even at the kind of lower club levels, you're just going to have a different level of expectation, or even just club management. Like if your board for your club is mostly volunteer, it's really hard to put all of your attention into that. And it's really hard to, where if you look at some of the clubs in the States, they have full staffs and they have a different infrastructure. And again, I don't think that's something that we can actually change. Like, I think that's a really difficult model to influence. I do think as the game continues to grow in all of North America and these pro leagues are coming up, it's going to provide new opportunities that could lean that a little bit closer. But I do think that's just something that I've been quite struck by of the contrast of, again, like if you're a club coach full time, you're gonna have a little bit more of an opportunity to get really creative, to really there's just a different element to it.
Not to mention, like, if you're a full time coach and this is your full time job, you should be striving to better yourself. You should be striving to keep up with the latest trends, and not only that, like if I'm a club and I'm paying a coach, I should have that kind of mandate of, whereas like if I like not only like I think coaching certification in Canada is an absolute joke in for the most part, but if I'm the leader, like, the club head, and I can mandate that, like, look, I'm paying you, you're going to come to this seminar that we're running, like, with our technical director, and you're going to learn how we run things, as opposed to if you just have a bunch of volunteers, you're probably not bringing them in on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon when they're already volunteering their time the rest of the time to better themselves in those ways. So I just think that I've heard so many people, because there's I would still say the majority of clubs in Canada are still not-for-profit, but there's a number of clubs that, like I've coached for clubs where like I was getting paid like per practice, like per hour, like it was embedded in the club fees. And I just find that there's so many people who are against that in Canada, but I think it just, there's so many more things that you can do with it as well.
Yeah, and I think it comes with pros and cons. Exactly that. Like, club fees are going to go up. There's going to be a different expectation that creates different energy with all that sort of stuff. I couldn't agree more. But there's just no denying that sort of more financially incentivized approach creates other opportunities that you would not have otherwise. And I think that's something that it's really difficult to perceive how that would change. Because again, a lot of these, it's more organic there because the outcome is you're going to get a Division I scholarship. Mm-hmm. And so the return on your investment's a little bit different as well, right? So it is kind of the whole landscape is different. But it's just interesting as a Canadian looking at it and trying to figure out how do we best support whatever. It's the same thing as if you're a college coach in the US and you look at international men's game. Okay, how do we take what they're doing and fit it to our personnel, our opportunity, whatever it is? Same thing. Okay, how do we take what's good or useful from that, and then what can we actually create? And maybe it will be more like experiments of clubs having that sort of model where it is more. And I mean, there are for sure clubs like that in Canada, and there are people that don't love it, but they typically get results.
Yep.
Right. So it's kind of one of those things. And I get it that sometimes you're looking at it like club volleyball is a kid playing a sport. Mm-hmm. Right? Like maybe we don't need it like that. That's totally fair if that's your point. As somebody who's been a professional athlete and believes in high performance and all that sort of stuff, that breeds a level of not only pride, but also, energy into it, that as an athlete, as a coach, as a whatever, you're going to be more, ambitious. So if there's going to be moments like that where, hey, there's something happening on this Saturday, this is your full-time job. Again, you got to come in on a Saturday now, but now maybe there's a bonus for coming in. Maybe there's a whatever, there's going to be different incentives just because of the infrastructure that's kind of surrounding it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I just, I had a really good thought in my head, and it just squirted out. So your thought and your ideas just really pushed it out there. So yeah, I'm trying to remember, what was I going to say? I don't know. I guess it really wasn't that important.
Yeah, that's right. Or maybe it's going to come back to you at some random moment.
Yeah, yeah. I'll like
going to revitalize
I'll, like,
Canadian
text,
volleyball.
yeah. I don't know about that. I mean, actually, no. I remember exactly what I said. So, in my opinion, I think right now in Canada, there's so much focus on high performance, and because of the base of players that we have, we're no longer able to expand on it that much. Because I think in Canada, there's no defined line. It's very ambiguous between what's high performance and what isn't. Right, when it comes to volleyball, right? Because I can have teams in the exact same division who one is considered high performance. They practice X amount of hours and they do all this stuff, whereas another one might not. Right. And I think that the next step for Canada is to introduce some type of developmental house league for these clubs, where you're able to play, like, you're not training at the same level, and you're, like, just the same way we have Timbits in soccer and hockey. You show up, you get your practice, you get your game, you get your shirt, and then you go home, right? That would allow clubs to run a bit more of a business, when you're making that money and you don't have to pay out, for coaches and for tournaments and all that stuff. But also you're just widening that base of players that are coming in, and you're creating more athletes who are coming in for the love of the game, right? And if we're able to separate that, like, whether it's soccer, goodness gracious, whether it's soccer or hockey or basketball, we all know in Canada that there is those systems, that there's house league and then there's competitive. And we know that there's a difference between those two in terms of the expectations and the rigors and stuff like that. But because we don't have, like, essentially the house league system that we have in Canadian volleyball is school volleyball, which in some ways is even more exclusive because you can't offer multiple teams at one age group. You can only offer one, right? So if we started offering many more opportunities at the house league level, I think we would start to see that transition where, like, we can divide it a little bit. For the kids who just want to enjoy the game, they can just enjoy the game. But for the kids who want to be high performance, they can be high performance. And that's kind of what I think I'd like to see. Like, to make the high performance side of things better in Canada, I think we need to focus on a little bit more on the recreational.
And do you think there's like a gap in supply, like the amount of people that would want to play volleyball? Is that why it's kind of not?
No, I think there's a gap.
And do you think there's a gap in? Okay, again, I'm not an expert in the landscape of Canadian developmental volleyball. Like, I know a little bit from my experience, which has changed so dramatically. And even now, I just know a little bit working, but it's definitely evolved to a degree that I don't really know.
Yeah.
But do you think there's enough demand for that? Like, do you think there's enough people that would come out and just play house league?
Yes. I think there's just less opportunities to do so because gym space is at such a premium, right? There's so few community gyms around, and it's just high school gyms. Like, having, worked for clubs and stuff like that in the past, it's just, I know how hard it is, to get gym space. And then, true, like from area to area, like, one of the big reasons Pac-Man is so successful is definitely because of Kelly Smith and the way he's been able to integrate himself within the Peel region schools. But from my understanding, and if there's anyone out there listening to this and can tell me otherwise, then please let me know. But, like, a lot of the times they don't pay for those school times and those gym times, whereas, like, here in Toronto you might have to. So, like, I know from in the past, having run those high school or those house league programs and those developmental programs, that there is a ton of interest, but there's just a lack of space to do so, right? Because if you only have so many gyms and so many courts and so many hours that you can play with, you're going to be giving those away to your higher playing, more competitive athletes. And then I think the other big thing is that we have yet to develop a way, or really properly introduce a way, for kids to enjoy volleyball early without it being too hard, because volleyball is a hard-ass sport to learn. It's the hardest sport to learn, in my opinion. None of what we do is natural. Everything is learned. Setting a ball isn't natural. Passing a ball isn't natural. Hitting a ball, blocking a ball, making these reads, none of this stuff is natural, right? Whereas soccer, basketball, like like shooting a basketball, even that is pretty natural. You know, I take a ball in my hand, like I'm gonna shoot it. Sure, like how you evolve your shot is going to change and stuff like that. So we need to do a better job at providing these opportunities and providing them in opportunities where kids can just go and play. Like I've been a part of too many clubs. Like we want to run a developmental program for kids, and kids are going to go in and do drills for an hour. They don't want that. No, just give them a Timbit shirt, gives them some Timbits. You know, find ways for them to play the game and evolve. I would love to see more 4-on-4. I'd love to see more playing on badminton nets, tennis nets, that kind of stuff. Kind of what they do in the Netherlands. But yeah, I think the opportunities aren't there, and it would take a little bit of time to build up. But I think if you look at the Mavericks Club in Ottawa, talking to Karen McLean, who runs that, their biggest growth has been through like their house leagues and how they've been able to provide that. And I mean, this is a club that's continuously like that has athletes on both of our national teams and on the beach national teams and wins national championships and send athletes to play for the top schools. So yeah, like I think that there's plenty of there's just a lack of opportunities, for kids, and that there would be that hunger for kids to go out there and play.
Yeah, and I think that also, you know, engages the interesting thought of, if a lot of these people working for clubs or working for schools are already overstretched, it's really difficult to add more. You know, it's kind of like this, because I would say a lot of people would agree, and I'm sure a lot of these clubs are thinking about that. How do we grow it? How do we get to younger athletes and all that sort of stuff? But that's going to demand a lot of time and like growing pains and all that sort of stuff. Where if you're a club that's, you know, has excess resources, you can then put those somewhere. Yeah. You know, as opposed to being some of these clubs that are kind of overrun, which again, I don't know if there's a solution for that in the short term. You know, like I don't know if there's an opportunity for clubs to just start monetizing in a different way. Like who knows? Because obviously you need the buy-in from kind of everybody involved. But it is an interesting kind of thought experiment of how do we help evolve Canada while already acknowledging the product that we're putting out is really fantastic, 100%. You know, with the circumstances, both at the international level, but also at the developmental level, or the fact that, you know, we can have Trinity Western could go down to Long Beach and like beat them. Yeah. You know, like stuff like that. It's really cool.
The fact that we have no pro league, it's legitimately like amongst women, it's one of the better sports, but amongst men, you know, like we're looking at hockey, football, basketball, soccer. I think it's between volleyball and baseball, but I still traditionally think that baseball wins out. So we're looking at like the 5th or 6th biggest sport in the country. The fact that we have the success that we do with the limited resources that we do is incredible. And I think it's just such a testament to the majoritarily volunteers who work. Like, you know, like for a long time, I don't know about post-pandemic, but I know leading into the pandemic, there was 100% OUA schools with relevant teams who didn't have full-time coaching positions for their head coaches, right? Yeah. Like, which is which is crazy when you think about it, right? Like Melissa Humana Paredes and Brandy Wilkerson, who are the two of the top best beach players in the world right now, played on a York University team who had to forfeit a playoff game when they were one of the best teams in the OUA because they played an illegitimate player. And at the end of the day, a lot of people I talked to was like, well, like the head coach was a principal as a high school at the same time. He was the principal of a high school and coaching a nationally ranked university team that ended up producing a gold medalist at the World Championships and a silver medalist at the they carried the flag for Canada at the Pan Am Games. Like, just the level of professionalism here has lacked quite a bit in the last little bit, and I think that's getting better though.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really fascinating, and I mean, it's a testament to the volleyball community. Like, I think it's pretty driven, find solutions and all that sort of stuff. And I think, you know, we're now in this situation where how do we alleviate that, or how do we create new opportunities so that they don't have to be burning out or whatever it is. And I mean, there's so many different spaces, different industries that it's like that. But it's just really impressive.
Yeah, 100%. That's why this is why we need pro leagues in North America ASAP, you know? Even just like, you know, that the idea of pro in North America is so skewed compared to what it is. Like, I know guys who are playing pro and making like 500 euros a month type thing. And I know, you know, guys like that. Like, I would say the majority of players make under 100 grand a year. It's not even close. And if we were able to, if we were able to provide something where you could just make like a simple living while play volleyball, that would be amazing. But I still think it's a little far off. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, TJ, is that I could literally sit here all day and talk to you about volleyball. And because every time you open your mouth, there's something more I want to ask you. But we have been going for quite a bit despite our interruptions. So is there anything that, you're out here where we're chatting, is there anything you want to touch on, anything you've discovered, seen, anything you want to bring up?
Ooh, a nice open-ended question.
Put the pressure on you for once.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Wow. Like nothing. I mean, I've obviously saw a lot of things, technically, tactically, things like that. But I just think it's just very fascinating to feel the momentum of the game across North America. Mm-hmm. It's accelerating much faster than it is in other places in the world.
Really?
And I think trying to think about how is that going to change the landscape in 15 years from now. It's just really interesting to think about. If you look at, the range or the spectrum of opportunities that will happen in or that it'll look like 20 years from now, it's just fascinating. It's really cool.
You think the momentum is bigger here than it is elsewhere?
I think it has to be. I mean, you look at now, of course, if you look at Brazil, Japan, Poland, it's just because they already had a very robust infrastructure around it. Mm-hmm. Where if you look at North America, we really didn't. It was a high school sport, or it was a hobby kind of sport. Even in the U.S., of course, they've had crazy success internationally, and they've obviously produced a lot of amazing players and all these kind of things. And it is a large sport, but it's fascinating to see how fast it's growing. Mm-hmm. And it's a testament to the North American mindset around sports, especially the, American mindset around sports. And so I think that will just be very interesting to see how, like, the ripple effects of that and how it plays out over the next, little bit. It's really difficult to judge. Of course, there's a lot of amazing people doing amazing things. And just naturally it's garnering a lot of attention. And so it'll be curious to see what it looks like.
Yeah, it's gonna be really exciting, I think. Like you're fully right. There's so much going on in this sport right now, and we've really seen it. Like, I've seen the growth of this sport and how much momentum it's picked up just in Canada over the past decade or so, and I think that's only going to get bigger. One last question for you here. With No Easy Buckets, you've been working with some of like the legends. Like, you guys just put out some stuff with DeCecco. You had William Marona in. Did you guys do stuff with Tony Utia as well? Yeah. What's that been like? Like, as you get to like converse with some of more of these legends, like how is that like? Are you continuously learning from them? Like, is like how do those conversations go? I'd love to sit in a room with you and DeCecco while the two of you just talk ball. Like, that would be like, I'd want that for my birthday. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Not only like, okay, for sure, these kind of legends, but it's also funny because they're kind of our friends. Like, we're kind of just people that we'd always be talking to anyway. But it's been really interesting to be in a position where you can go meet with these incredible club directors. You can go meet with these incredible NCAA coaches. You can go meet with the legends of the game. And 100%, you're always learning. Like, again, or I can go and talk to Grubenikov, and I don't know a lot about the libero position or passing or whatever, but hearing him articulate things and hearing Dustin articulate things and hearing, the cool thing about the setting side of it has very much been that pretty much what all of us are doing or thinking is very similar, mm-hmm. right? There hasn't really been moments where I'm like, oh, what? I got to go think about that for a while. A lot of it has been, it's articulated different mm-hmm. because of a language barrier or because of, a coach that they heard it from. That's the language they use. And now the coach that I heard from, it's different. But the principles are very, very similar. The philosophies might be slightly different. But I think it's been a very cool journey into, okay, how do we actually articulate and figure out these principles and then give younger athletes the opportunities to know that? Because I don't know about you, but when I was younger, again, I had amazing coaches and all that, but I didn't know what these principles were, or these like pillars of being a good athlete were, or whatever. I was kind of like, yeah, I can go in the gym.
I was never a good athlete, so we'll keep me out of the conversation completely, you know?
But I mean, I could go in the gym and I could get an ace and I could, push the ball with my hands to somebody who would get a kill. And I understood that we would objectively be winning games. So I was given this feedback of that's positive and all that sort of stuff. And there's, of course, so many things that I learned from coaches. Setting, definitely less. Like I think there's an inherent ability to teach defense and serving and things like that, where setting there isn't in the same way in North America. Like this is something that's quite limited across the way over here. So to also hear of their experiences as a French setter, as an Argentinian setter, as a Brazilian setter, that when they were growing up, there are more profound schools of setting around the world. And it's kind of become my mission to try and develop the premier school of setting.
He's back.
I'm back.
You got it.
But my vision is to try and, create this premier school of setting, right? So again, if I go and talk to DeCecco, to whoever it is, and there are these principles in place that all of them believe in and try and execute in their own ways, maybe, or they try and do things differently. Tactics are also, inherently subjective, right? Just the fact that, you might make the right decision and not score. You might make the wrong decision and score, right? It adds another element to it, which is, obviously why it's fun. But the more technical elements and even like the mental side of it, it was funny. I talked to like a bunch of those guys and we all were kind of joking and reminiscing about how after every game we could never sleep. Like it was always just like really difficult and everybody had different ways to cope with that and all that sort of stuff. But it was definitely a constant theme among elite setters, was that after games you can't really sleep. Your mental, your cognitive kind of load is quite high. So for me, I'm thinking, okay, how do we start that journey into that earlier for a younger athlete? Because myself early on, it was crazy. I'd have like headaches after games. I couldn't sleep at all, like all this sort of stuff. To later on, I was able to process information more efficiently. I knew what I was looking for more. I trusted myself more. So that kind of subsided a bit.
Was it coming from rethinking and like thinking back on situations, or is it just the whole mental load, had gotten so big that you just needed more time to decompress? Like where was that coming from?
I think it's more option two. I think it's more you were just processing at such a high rate that then like for it to slow down or shut off, it takes a longer duration. But it was interesting like that. We were all kind of bonding over that and kind of laughing about it. But then my thought is, okay, if we could start setters younger, again, not thinking of complicated international tactics, but start thinking in that way, we can develop a model that's how they see the game. And maybe when they're 25, they don't have to have these sorts of situations, right? We can already develop the game quicker because now we have more tactics involved, but also now you're not playing catch up, right? I always felt like I was playing catch up, and I think that's a really cool opportunity that I have, and almost responsibility that I have, talking to all these not only legendary players but legendary coaches, to try to figure out, okay, how do we create a model that's more inclined to watch the athlete progress in a more effective way and eliminate barriers around that. Again, barriers like your footwork has to be a certain way, otherwise you're doing it wrong. And then you go to your next coach and they say a different way. I view that as a barrier. Now this athlete's thinking about something that, now I understand the proficiency or direction towards learning fundamentals, and that's important, but they need to come with an asterisk of these principles, right? So I kind of divide principles and technique a little bit, where these principles are, you want to have a body awareness where you can be stable under the ball. Okay, there's going to be different ways you do that, but that's the principle there.
Yeah.
And again, it's been cool taking all these things from all these legends, as you said, and understanding that, okay, we all share these same principles. How do we package that or create something that a 15-year-old version of us could then take that and go, okay, now that's what I'm working on. And I can identify when it doesn't go well, and that's what I need to work on more, or I can identify when I'm doing that well and I can move to the next thing. Right? That's kind of the idea. And I just think, again, in North America, the setting philosophy, if you look at America especially, is let's get a big opposite and try and see if they can be a setter.
Yeah.
right? It's like,
Yeah.
we get this
It's the
really
Volleyball play, like just
exactly. We get a very physical player, and I mean, this is a theme that I'm constantly talking about because people are asking me, do you think short setters can make it? Do you think that like blah blah blah? And one, I'm like, well, look at internationally. Most setters are not oversized. Let's call it
look
right.
at Sakita, Toniutti, Sabertoli, like so many of the best
So
ones.
many everywhere.
Checo, like look at him. Yeah.
Exactly. Everyone, and it's funny because then if you actually think about it, it's like, okay, let's look at Tanuti versus some 7-foot French guy. Who's going to be the guy that's kind of playing? So Tanuti for sure. Maybe the other guy gets a block every set, one more block.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe they get another ace every set. And you're thinking like, whoa, 2 points a set. That's a big difference. That's like pretty impressive. But then they set the ball 200 times that game, right? Where Tanuti's obviously making up for those 2 points. He's getting far more. And not only that, like we were talking about, that stability and rhythm, he's also able to influence that. So there's also things that are immeasurable that he's also influencing, right? So it's been really interesting to me because again, in America, it's very much high performance. Everything's data driven. Everything's how high do you touch? What do you do? All that sort of stuff. And the amount of times I hear like, oh yeah, and she's a 6'3" left-handed setter. And they're like proud of that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, those metrics don't mean very much to me. It can be if they're an amazing setter and they also have that, that's great. Again, lean into your strengths, right? For sure.
100%, yeah.
But the fact that you are contacting the ball so often in the game and your role amongst the team is so diverse that you need to be able to run the offense first, right? Like that is, of course, the premier role. And again, I think it's just going to provide opportunities for other setters in the States to really stand out. Even like Emma Grome, who I work with from Kentucky, undersized for sure.
Yeah.
But nobody uses the ground like she uses the ground. And she's able to do things that are really fantastic. And I think it's just one of those cool things where, she just keeps winning SEC Player of the Week or whatever it is. Like she keeps doing it. And it's like, again, I hope that that's something that coaches unanimously will grab from and will understand that.
Nobody uses the ground like she uses the ground. Are you turns in terms of like how she tracks, like how she's moving or how she's like using the ground physically to get up to the ball? Like, sorry, that was just a very interesting statement to me.
Well, I actually have and this is something I work with the younger setters a lot on and articulate, and that's kind of how we use it. I would say I do actually have another call in 9 minutes, and it's probably too big of a topic to dive into because it is a huge one and something that I've, been refining ever since later in my career. And again, because ultimately the whole goal or the dream is to create these tools, create the school of setting so that ultimately a younger setter can have more confidence or trust themselves more. I just really look at it like I would go to one team. This is what this footwork's supposed to be. Go to another one. It's a little bit different. Go to this one. I make a good set. I think coach yells at me. Again, not that I'm saying that these coaches were doing anything wrong, but I just didn't know the direction that I was supposed to go, which then there's no way you can have this progression where you're seeing this happen when you don't trust the direction you're going, right? Because I don't know where I'm going. I'm like, okay, was that good? The only feedback I had was, are we winning games? Am I getting awards? Am I getting scouted? Right? Like that's the only real metric you have to evaluate that. So it's been really interesting to see what other elite setters and coaches see, and then start to develop and refine, almost like a manual on how to do that or what you should actually look for to do that.
Okay, great. So basically we know now that whenever we want to produce a setter in this country, we need to go straight to you.
Well, but it's been interesting because again, it's a unique opportunity that I have where I get to just think about this from my life.
That's great.
Right? Like, all I did was the last 15 years, 20 years, think about this. Now I get to just think about how do I articulate it to a younger version of myself or a younger athlete or younger whatever. And, there are undoubtedly way better head coaches than me. There are way better, people at understanding the logistics of a club or that can move the space of volleyball and things like that. But I am in a unique position that I just get to think about this all the time, right? Like this is what I get to kind of devote my life to. And my whole life has already been devoted to it, which just it's just a really cool, unique, position to be in. And I'm obviously extremely grateful for all the coaches and people that have helped me get to this point, and then the opportunity to actually do it, right? Like I never really thought in my career that I'd go and become more or less like a setting coach. I of course would want to, but I didn't see what that would look like, and then Dustin's been able to create, and the energy and momentum behind it has created the opportunity to do that.
Fair enough. I mean, there's so much in there that I want to dive into, but I know we're short on time. We've been talking for 2.5 hours now. Real one last question. And this is who's the best sitter in the world right now?
DeCecco.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
not close.
Not even Micah?
No.
Okay. I mean, he does do some disgusting things. Getting to watch.
I think, and don't get me wrong, it also depends, like just within that question, how you would evaluate the best center in the world. You know what I mean? Like I think, of course, if you just look on pure winning, leadership, all these different things, it's a huge scope of how you're actually going to look at it. But I think who is the best that can manipulate the balls and create opportunities and do things like that? It's not like I haven't seen anyone that close to DeCecco. Micah does some amazing things. Oh, we're back. Oh, okay, we're back. We're still. Micah does some amazing things as an athlete. Like he's an incredible athlete. But just in terms of what DeCecco's been able to do, it's honestly fascinating. I just love watching him. And actually, he was somebody that, in talking with him and how he's articulating things, there was just where he was looking, and I don't mean visually looking, but where he was like feeling or whatever is slightly different than how I would have seen it. Mm-hmm. Again, still the same principles, but kind of articulated in a very different way. But I can't think of anybody that's that close,
No.
Even like, Maroof, when he was kind of in his prime, was a master and an artist and all that sort of stuff, but didn't have the consistency of DeCecco. And a lot of these elite setters, it's just not, I don't know. He's like a generational, at this point, you look at Ricardo, I'd have to do even like a deeper dive, but it's difficult to even mention anybody else in DeCecco's like kind of space.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Just watching some of the things that he does, like his baseline is so good that he makes teams who shouldn't be good fantastic. Like the stuff that he does, like punching balls to set them to to side.
Yeah. That was
I'm pretty sure that you guys just.
Like that. I was about to make a post earlier because, I talk a lot about, we want to make sure our hips are under the ball first. We want to make sure our hips and shoulders are aligned. We want to make sure if we're scrambling, we can get our elbows under the ball in some way. Like, if you end up reaching out here, it's just your thumbs that end up playing on the ball. Yeah. Where if you watch that play, he does all those things. Mm-hmm. So yes, he is like, that's kind of one of the cool things is he's like a master, an artist, but he's applying these very general principles that a 14-year-old setter should also be focusing on. Now, a 14-year-old setter might not run and punch that ball, but a lot of people say like, oh, we shouldn't watch them because they're so crazy, right? Like they just do things so differently. It's like, no, but if you actually distill it to those principles, he's just an absolute master at those things. But I say that because I haven't seen somebody do what he's able to do, and not a situation like that. Like again, I think there are probably things that Micah, there are things that other setters can do that are like crazy and difficult situations. But what he's able to create overall, and I think, and that's why Ricardo, I would certainly put up there, or it would be like, could be at a different level. I haven't dove that deep there, was because he was able to speed up an offense to a degree that it just created so much stress everywhere, and it was just wild. But I just physically watching what DeCecco can do, I've tried. I'm like trying to find other centers that are able to do things like that, and it's just not. It's just not the same.
I thought you were saying that you've tried to do what he's done. Like you try to go out there and set like what he's.
Well, no, I think, but when I was younger, I definitely used him as an example of how to manipulate the ball and try and figure things out, and what he's actually, how he's creating it. Even like the impulse that he has out of his hands, like that impulse is such a huge advantage. If in that first meter you can beat the blocker, and that was a testament. If you look at later in my career, I had a release that was at not DeCecco release. That's like, again, generational, not something you could ever compete with. But I reached a certain point that I was able then to be, in that very top tier, because I had seen what he's doing and how he's able to actually create it, which obviously takes a whole career kind of to do. But I just look at, I haven't seen, I just really haven't seen anybody that I could be like, ooh, that could be. There are other players with other amazing qualities and champions and different things.
But pure center.
Yeah, but pure center, yeah, I don't think it's close.
TJ, I wish I could spend off day afternoon talking ball with you. Like, you just jumped into this and you just told me you had 9 minutes, so I think is probably down to 2 now. So I can't thank you enough for wading through all these technical difficulties with me and chatting with me. For those who want to find out or follow TJ's more, go ahead, check him out over at noeasybuckets.com. Easy is spelled just EZY or EZY as you guys say it in the States. But TJ, always a pleasure. Can't wait to see you and talk to you again. And let's. I hope you are doing well, and I hope you continue to do so.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you guys are putting out there. It's super cool. Again, during this momentum of the game, to have so many people supporting the game. I think it's just really, really fascinating, and I'm excited to see this kind of come out. And I'm really hoping that the volleyball community will have some cool questions that pop up from this, and we can kind of keep engaging
let's do it. I think what we need to do sometime is have like a volleyball creators meetup where we all get together one weekend and we just shoot the shit. I think that would be a great time.
I think we're gonna do it where it's a volleyball creators meetup, but it's on a stage and people can come watch. Like a live engaged seminar or something like that.
Hey, let's talk to the AVCA. We'll do it for the convention.
There we go.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks, guys. Peace.